Hi y'all, I'm Amber, welcome back to my channel Cats Reads, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my 6 book reviews. Other 5 book reviews. It will be 6 books in the near future, but this time it's only 5 because the 6th book that I borrowed from the library I chose not to read. That being said, let's just jump in with the first book, which is The Reader by Bernhard Schlink. This is about 15-year-old Michael Berg who falls ill on the way home from school and is rescued by Hannah, a woman twice his age. In time, she becomes his lover. She kind of enchants him in a way, but then she just disappears. And when he meets her next, she's on trial where she isn't really defending herself. I don't want to spoil this book, but it does deal with World War II a bit, and I found it very interesting in how this author handled that subject matter and the questions and new perspectives that he brought up through Michael's perspective. This is after it's all ended. Michael, I don't think, lived through World War II, but his parents did, and the effects of what happened during World War II, next generation, and how it still lingers in Germany was very interesting to see. I really love the writing in this book. It was very beautiful. I did think that sometimes he rambled a little bit too long on philosophy stuff, but it wasn't a major negative for the book. It's just sometimes it did seem to drag the pacing down a little bit. But overall, this was a wonderful book that handled both the relationship between Michael and Hannah very well. He didn't overplay it. It didn't become uncomfortable for me to read about, but I felt like it handled the subject matter realistically, and seeing Michael's thinking process and how he was dealing with his relationship was very interesting, to say the least, and I just enjoyed this book immensely. So in the end, I gave The Reader 4.5 stars. I have already bought this book also. Next, I read Babel 17 by Samuel R. Delany. This is a sci-fi novel about how we've spread out throughout the universe. We're living on all these different planets with other species, I guess, and there's these invasions that seem to be happening, and before each invasion there's this code or language that comes out through the radio waves or something like that, and they're trying to decode it. I got 50 pages in before I DNF'd it. I just couldn't take it any longer. I felt like his writing was very cliche in the sense like he would be looking in a mirror and he would describe himself. I also felt like he censored his characters, which really annoyed me, especially because it seemed to only happen with the woman, and that just frustrated me so much. I felt like I was missing something that she was saying that lent some insight into this actual story because of his censorship. Also, I felt like he took too long to explain things out. It got to the point where by the time he finished explaining things, I couldn't even understand what he was trying to explain anymore. So this book felt like a huge mess to me. For me, I can't understand why it's gotten such great praise, other than the fact that his writing style does feel more literary than the typical sci-fi novel is, I guess. But that really wasn't a plus to me because the way he wrote it felt, like I said, cliche. So in the end, I had to give this 1.5 stars. I also read 2 Years, 8 Months, and 28 Nights by Salman Rushdie. This is about a group of people who, after a major storm, have weird things start happening to them. Like a man who starts levitating, a kid who sees his graphic novel character come to life, things like that. What they do not know and will come to realize is that they are descendants of the jinn, and the world between the jinn and us is being split open, and good and bad jinn are coming through, and they'll have to work together to try to defeat the bad jinn. I tried so hard to finish this book because I thought this author's writing style, the way he wrote it, was pretty good. Although he seemed to lose his commas, like he just lost them and he can never find them again, because there's just times where I felt like there needed to be commas, and there never was, and that just really took me out of my reading experience because it just felt like there was something wrong with the sentences all the time. But that's just a small thing. Overall, the grammar and writing was good, but what really bothered me was how nothing seemed to ever actually be happening. There's a lot of foreshadowing, but no actual plot. And a lot of that was because he kept rambling on philosophical discussions, and that just really bothered me, and he made these characters ramble, and it was just frustrating because nothing seemed to ever actually happen. And the thing is, I kept trying to get through that and see if anything was going to happen. That's why I got halfway through before I gave up. Overall, this was a frustrating, plotless book that just that had a really interesting idea, but never really went anywhere. I had to give this book 1.5 stars. Next, I picked up Fates and Furies by Lauren Groff, about Lotto and Matilda and their 24-year marriage. I gave up on this book. I went to look at the reviews, and there was just a whole lot of negative reviews, and there's mixed opinions on this book, but I didn't think it was that one-sided, but it is, and I kind of wish that I had just avoided this book because this was a huge mess. For one thing, her metaphors, although it didn't completely bother me as much as others, they were over the top, and her writing was kind of, I guess I would describe it as fuzzy, in the sense that it would take me over 2 paragraphs to get what she was actually describing. She never actually came out and said anything, and because of the way she described it, I couldn't make sense of it for a long while, and then I would have to go back to the paragraph and be like, oh, that's what she was describing. It was just really frustrating, and the story was a mess. I just felt like she was trying too hard to make a literary work out of this, and it just turned into this too flowery, too over the top metaphoric writing that really confused me because I couldn't make sense of what the story was supposed to be. Was it supposed to be a dream? Was it supposed to be magical realism? And if it was just supposed to be a realistic look at a marriage, I wish she had just had down-to-earth writing, because that would have been more logical sense to this book, and it wouldn't have confused me as much. She does have some beautiful writing here, and if she had just tamed it down and controlled it, it would have ended up being a really good book. I will probably try another one of her works and see, because I've heard that her previous work is actually better than this, so I definitely want to try another one of hers because, like I said, she has good writing in there. She just needs to tame it down. So then I had to give this sadly 1.5 stars. The fifth and last book that I read is The Yard by Alex Christian. This is set in Victorian London, and it starts off with one of their police officers being murdered and stuffed in a trunk. This is also after Jack the Ripper disappears, and of course the police aren't that trusted anymore, and you can see that throughout the book. This book reminded me a lot of Murdoch Mysteries, the TV show, but whereas the TV series was actually good and had a strong plot line, this one really fell short. This was quite the mess, much more of a mess than Fates and Furies was. There's just too many cases going on that somehow ended up being tied in a neat little knot at the end with a very messy, all over the place plot. I didn't really appreciate that. Like, I thought when I read the synopsis that each of these cases, and I only thought there was 2 of them, were gonna somehow come back and be part of one case, but no, they weren't. And I thought that the dialogue was unnatural and too modern for the time that this was set in. I also felt like there are things that I questioned in this book, like the science of how they were figuring out like fingerprints. Like, I don't know if they even knew about fingerprinting at that time. Like, I felt like it was just barely being discovered, and I don't think it would have been actually used but I don't know that for sure. But it did kind of make me question the validity of some of the things that he brought up scientifically. The last thing that really bothered me was that he put in the murderer's perspective, and I've had books where their perspective was in it, but those authors did such an amazing job in keeping who that person was obscure enough that it lent this an extra tone of mystery and kept you guessing, whereas this, he just totally gave away who it was through that perspective, and it just took away the mystery, and I felt like you were supposed to be guessing and that you weren't supposed to really know who this person was, but he didn't do a good enough job in keeping it mysterious. So that was a huge disappointment, and we could have really done without the murderer's perspective at all. But this wasn't like the worst book I've ever read. I mean, it is messy and all, but he does have some skill in his writing. I can see that he has talent. He did great in creating his characters. I loved Hammersmith and Day, but because he just didn't seem to know where he was going with his plot, and that it was all over the place, it just kind of became a wreck. In the end, I had to give it 2 stars. These 5 books that I have read. Tell me down below if you've read any of these. I would love to discuss them with you. I would also love to hear what you've been reading lately. Thank you all so much for watching, and keep smiling.